He told her to leave his house, without knowing she had just saved his daughter's life. The Langston estate shimmered in the afternoon sun, its rolling vineyards stretching across the Napa Valley hills like a green sea. Beyond the wine barrels, past the ivy-laced patio, and under the carved stone archway that led to the private garden pool, the world was still, until it wasn't. Ethan Langston stepped out of his sleek black Lincoln SUV, blazer draped over one arm, phone pressed to his ear. His meeting in San Francisco had ended earlier than expected. For a man who commanded boardrooms and bent billion-dollar deals to his will, coming home early wasn't part of the plan. But neither was the sound he heard just then. A scream. No, not a scream. A shrill cry, sharp and high, cutting through the vineyard air like shattered glass. "Emma?" He dropped his briefcase. The world around him slowed, then snapped into motion. Running breathless, he darted past the grape trellises, across the flagstone terrace and toward the family pool. And that's when he saw it. A small splash, a little arm flailing, a pair of pigtails just below the surface. "Emma!" Ethan lunged forward, but someone beat him to it. A blur of brown skin and soaked linen, Grace Williams, the housemaid, raced from the other side of the garden, dove into the water, and reached Emma just before she disappeared again. Grace wasn't a swimmer, not really. She hated water, feared it even. But instinct didn't ask permission. She grabbed the child, legs kicking to stay afloat, coughing as chlorinated water stung her throat. Emma was limp for a moment, but then coughed, sputtered, and cried into Grace's chest. Ethan, wide-eyed and furious, stood at the pool's edge. "What the hell are you doing to my daughter?" Grace gasped, barely treading water. I pulled her out. She fell." "Get out," he snapped. "Get out now!" She swam to the edge, teeth chattering. Her wet uniform clung to her frame. She lifted Emma gently onto the tile. The girl reached back for Grace, sobbing. "Daddy! Grace saved me!" Ethan pulled his daughter into his arms, shielding her with his body, ignoring Grace entirely. "It's okay, baby. I've got you." Grace climbed out, trembling, soaked. Her shoes gone, knees scraped from hitting the pool steps. But Ethan didn't look at her. He didn't say thank you, not even a nod. Only, "I don't want to see you near the pool again. In fact, just stay out of sight. You've done enough." The words landed heavier than the water still clinging to Grace's skin. She looked down, ashamed, humiliated. A moment ago she was drowning, not just in water, but in the weight of choosing to act without thought for herself. Now, she was being punished for it. She walked slowly back toward the house, her hair dripping, her heart sinking. That evening, the estate was quiet. The vines rustled in the evening breeze. The kitchen clattered as Grace prepared dinner. Her fingers were still pruned from the pool. Her shoulder throbbed. She served Emma's plate silently, keeping her eyes lowered. Ethan hadn't spoken to her since the incident, and she hadn't expected him to. But Emma, sweet, curious Emma, looked up and whispered, "Grace, will you eat with me?" Grace shook her head gently. "Not today, little sunshine." Ethan glanced up, mid-bite. His gaze lingered a moment longer than it should have. That night, Ethan sat in his study, drink in hand, a decanter of scotch untouched beside him. Something bothered him, gnawed at him. He opened the security app on his phone, pulled up the camera footage near the pool. There she was, Grace, rushing across the patio barefoot, hair flying, no hesitation. The exact moment she leapt into the pool played in silence. Her arms flailed for balance before disappearing beneath the surface. Her fear was clear. but so was her resolve. He leaned back, sighing. In another room, Grace sat on the edge of her twin bed, wrapped in a towel, legs drawn to her chest. Her mother's rosary hung on the lamp beside her. She whispered, "It's okay, Mama. I'd do it again." The morning sun filtered through the gauzy linen curtains of the Langston estate, softening the grand lines of its architecture. The vineyards shimmered with dew, and hummingbirds danced above the roses outside the kitchen windows. But inside, the air was brittle, silent. Grace Williams stood at the marble kitchen island, hands methodically slicing strawberries. Her uniform had been freshly washed, though faint chlorine still clung to the seams. Her hair was pulled into a neat, low bun. On the outside, she looked composed, but inside, her chest carried the quiet ache of having been invisible. No one had apologized. No one had knocked on her door. No one had said a word since the moment she climbed out of that pool, dripping and shaking, with Ethan Langston's wrath chasing her instead of gratitude. Still, she had a job to do. She plated the French toast carefully, extra cinnamon, just how Emma liked it. Beside it, a glass of warm milk with honey. She folded the napkin into a swan and placed it gently next to the utensils. Footsteps padded across the hall. "Grace!" Emma's voice was bright, unburdened. A 6-year-old's forgiveness was effortless. She ran into the kitchen in her fuzzy lamb pajamas, her curls wild from sleep. "You're here!" Grace turned, smiling softly. "Good morning, sweet pea." Emma wrapped her arms around Grace's waist and leaned her cheek against the apron. "You didn't leave." The words stung more than Grace expected. "Of course not. I told you I wouldn't, didn't I?" Emma looked up, brow wrinkled. "But Daddy yelled. You were crying." Grace knelt down to her level, smoothing a stray curl behind the child's ear. "Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're scared." Emma's small hand reached for Grace's. "Mom used to say that too. She said when someone shows up when it's hard, they're the kind of person you keep close." Grace blinked quickly, rising to her feet. "Why don't you sit down and have breakfast before it gets cold?" Ethan entered the dining room just as Emma took her first bite. He paused when he saw Grace, quiet, steady, placing a second plate for Emma with deliberate care. Their eyes met briefly. "Morning," he said, his voice stiff. "Morning, Mr. Langston," she replied, gaze lowering. He moved toward the coffee machine, pouring himself a black cup. He lingered a beat longer than usual, watching the way Emma giggled at something Grace whispered. The warmth between them was undeniable, natural, almost maternal. He took his coffee and returned to the head of the table. Emma beamed at him. "Daddy, guess what Grace made me?" "What's that?" "Cinnamon toast." And she cut the strawberries like little hearts. Ethan nodded absently. His mind was elsewhere, on the image of Grace diving into that pool, not hesitating, not even looking around, just leaping. He hadn't slept well. After watching the security footage, he'd sat up replaying it over and over again in his mind. The way her arms flailed, the way she shoved Emma upward despite the risk to herself. It didn't look like instinct. It looked like sacrifice. And then there was the sound of her voice, calm even as she shook. "I pulled her out. She fell." He had misjudged her. That much was clear. But even worse, he had humiliated her. Later that morning, when Grace passed by the study to refill the flower vase, she found the door ajar. Ethan was seated behind the large oak desk, staring at his phone. He looked up. "Grace." She froze. "Sir?" He hesitated, words pressed behind his lips, struggling to take shape. "Are you feeling better?" "After yesterday." Grace's voice was steady. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Ethan looked down. Emma's lucky you were there. Grace bowed her head slightly. She's a wonderful child. I would do it again. He nodded, then looked away, as if the weight of his guilt was too much to carry in her presence. I saw the footage. Grace didn't respond. Her fingers tightened slightly around the vase. She trusts you, Ethan added. She loves you, Grace said quietly. She talks about you all the time. A beat of silence passed between them, thick and awkward. Grace turned to leave, but then paused. Mr. Langston. He glanced up. She said something this morning. She said her mom used to say that the people who stay when it's hard, those are the ones who matter. Ethan swallowed, throat dry. Grace didn't wait for a response. She stepped out, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and wet roses. That afternoon, Emma was drawing in the garden when she ran to Grace, holding up a picture. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one in a purple dress. This is you, Emma said, pointing. And this is me. And that's Daddy. I made our family. Grace knelt, taking the picture. Her throat tightened. Emma added shyly, Mom used to draw with me. I think she'd like you. Grace opened her mouth, but no sound came. That evening, in the quiet of his study, Ethan watched that footage one last time. This time, he didn't focus on Grace's jump. He paused the video just after Emma was pulled out, just after Grace placed her gently on the tiles. In that frozen frame, Grace's face was turned away from the camera, but her body curved protectively toward Emma, like a shield. He exhaled long and slow, then whispered to no one, I was wrong. The roses had not bloomed this vividly in 3 years. Grace stood at the edge of the western garden, holding a rusted watering can in her hand, surrounded by marigold sunlight and the hum of bees. The vines overhead draped like lace, casting flickers of gold across her arms as she gently tended to the flower beds that had once been someone else's sanctuary, Marissa Langston's. It was Emma who had led her there. I think Mommy still visits the roses, the girl had said that morning, skipping ahead barefoot. Even if she's a star now, I think she whispers in the garden. Grace didn't laugh. She didn't correct her. She simply followed. Now she knelt before a row of fading crimson roses, fingers brushing soil damp from the morning's dew. She hadn't planned to pull the weeds, not today, but something about the stillness of this place begged her to stay a while longer, to be quiet, to listen. Her hand hit something, not a root, not a stone. It was small, rectangular, smooth. Grace dug carefully, brushing away the dirt until a sealed envelope appeared beneath the soil. Pressed against the side of the garden's old sundial. The paper had yellowed. The ink bled slightly at the edges. Her heart stilled. Written across the front in swirling script, For Ethan, if I am no longer here. Grace sat back on her heels. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to open it. It wasn't hers. But it wasn't the first time the house had asked something of her quietly. That evening, as the sun sank over the vineyard and bathed the estate in gold, Grace found Ethan on the back patio. He sat with a tumbler of scotch, staring into the distance as Emma played with chalk on the flagstone. Grace approached slowly. I found this, she said simply, holding the envelope out with both hands. Ethan took it, brows knitting. The moment he saw the handwriting, the glass in his hand trembled. Where did you... In the rose garden, buried under the sundial, Grace answered. I didn't read it. Ethan didn't reply. He simply nodded, then disappeared inside. He didn't open the letter right away. It took him 3 hours, and 3 years of grief. He sat in the old reading room with the door locked, the lights low. The scent of Marissa's favorite vanilla and rose candle still clung faintly to the velvet drapes. Hands shaking, he tore the envelope. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I fought as hard as I could, but life has a different kind of math than we do. Some equations never balance. I'm not writing this to say goodbye. I'm writing this because I know how you grieve. You close doors. You bury yourself in numbers, meetings, vineyard reports, and whiskey. You pretend silence is strength. But Ethan, I need you to open your eyes, especially to the people who don't look like us, don't live like us. I need you to trust grace. Yes, that grace. The young woman who came to our door the week I got my diagnosis. The one who helped me walk to the bathroom when I could barely stand. The one who didn't run when I broke down in the garden after I lost my hair. She is light, Ethan. Humble, quiet light. If anything ever happens to me, and you feel the world tilting into darkness again, look to her. Let her teach Emma how to be kind. Let her remind you that love is not noise, but presence. She is the last thing I give you. Love always, Marissa. Ethan didn't cry at the funeral. Not when he gave the eulogy. Not when he scattered her ashes into the wind over their favorite bluff in Big Sur. But now, with the letter crumpled in his hand and the ghost of his wife whispering through ink and memory, he did. The next morning, Grace was folding laundry when she heard the quiet knock on the linen closet door. Ethan stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept. In his hand, the letter. She knew you, he said softly. Grace nodded. A little. She let me braid her hair when it grew back in soft. She trusted you. She saw me, Grace replied, voice almost a whisper. Ethan held the letter tighter. I didn't. Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. A long pause stretched between them. I read your name in her words, Ethan said, and it's the first time I felt her voice since she left. Another beat. I owe you an apology. Grace's throat worked. Mr. Langston. Ethan, she blinked. I think it's time you stopped calling me sir, he added. You're not staff. Not really. Not to Emma, not to Marissa, and now, not to me. Grace exhaled. Not out of relief, but because something inside her finally let go of the breath it had been holding for years. That afternoon in the garden, Emma handed Grace a single rose. I think Mommy's happy you're still here, the little girl said. Grace looked up at the sky. The sun flickered through the vineyard vines. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The morning fog rolled in early, thick, low, and heavy, blanketing the vineyard like breath held too long. The grapevines, once proud and glistening in morning dew, now looked cloaked in quiet suspicion. Grace stepped outside with Emma's lunchbox in hand, a pink thermos clinking inside it. She paused on the porch, frowning at the odd stillness. Something about the air felt off. Not cold, not dangerous exactly, but different. She was about to turn back in when she heard it. A rustle. Not of wind, but movement. Her eyes darted to the line of olive trees by the front gate, where shadows clung too tightly to the bark. But when she looked again, it was gone. Later that afternoon, Grace noticed something unusual tucked inside the black iron mailbox at the end of the estate's long gravel drive. It wasn't an envelope with a stamp. No return address, no courier label, just a brown manila folder. Thick. Sealed with a single silver clasp. She opened it. Inside were printed photographs. Photo 1. Emma playing in the garden, alone. Photo 2. Emma sitting on Grace's lap, smiling up at her, nose crinkled with laughter. Photo 3. Emma picking flowers with Grace crouched beside her, taken from afar, through bushes. Photo 4. Emma sleeping on a blanket near the vineyard. Grace beside her, reading a book. All the photos had one thing in common. None were taken from within the estate. Someone had been watching them from the outside. Grace's breath caught. She clutched the folder and turned back toward the house, her pace picking up with every step. Ethan was in the study when she stormed in, her calm exterior cracking for the first time since he'd known her. "These were in the mailbox," she said, voice clipped. He took the folder from her hand and flipped through it, his eyes sharpening with each click of the paper. "Who the hell took these?" he muttered. Grace's arms folded, jaw tight. "I don't know, but they're recent. This one," she pointed, "was taken 2 days ago. I remember the pink daisy crown she made." "Where was security?" Ethan asked, already pulling out his phone. "Probably guarding the house, not the woods outside your property line." Ethan stared out the window, mind racing. "Who has access to Emma's schedule?" he asked quietly. Grace hesitated. "Only the house staff, me, Alyssa, maybe the chef, Dominic." He turned to her. "Alyssa's new. You hired her." "She came recommended from a trusted agency," Grace said, defensive. "Her references were spotless." "Too spotless," Ethan said flatly. That night, Ethan called in a private investigator. Quietly, discreetly, no police yet. He wanted facts before scandal. At midnight, he reviewed the gate logs. Alyssa had a habit of stepping outside the estate for calls to her family almost every evening around the same time, always near the fence, always alone. The cameras didn't face the woods. A blind spot Ethan had never cared about, until now. The next morning, Grace approached Alyssa on the back veranda. "You okay?" Grace asked gently. Alyssa looked up from her phone, eyes wide. "Yes, of course, why?" Grace handed her a teacup. "Just seemed like you'd been on edge lately." Well, my brother's in the military. I worry sometimes. Sorry if I've been distant." Grace smiled kindly. "Understandable." She walked away, but her mind was racing. That story hadn't come up in the interview. 2 nights later, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the estate's main hallway camera picked up movement. A figure in a black hoodie slipped through the side door. No alarm tripped. No lights flickered. They moved like they belonged. But the camera caught a partial face as the figure turned slightly toward the wine cellar. Ethan paused the footage. He zoomed in. Not Alyssa. A man. Late 30s. Familiar. "Daniel Reyes," he whispered. "Former estate manager. Fired 4 years ago after accessing Marissa's private medical files and attempting to blackmail Ethan with information about her declining condition. No one had seen him since. Until now." The following morning, Ethan called Grace into the study. Emma was kept upstairs with her tutor. "Do you know a Daniel Reyes?" he asked. Her brows furrowed. "Only by name. Wasn't he fired before I arrived?" Ethan nodded. "He's on the property again. And he has help." Grace sat down slowly. "You think Alyssa... I think someone gave him access. Someone inside." Grace folded her hands, calm but focused. "Then we bait them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "We plant a document," she said. "Make it look like it contains legal updates about Emma's trust. We lock it in a location only a staff member would know." Ethan stared at her. "And if it disappears," Grace added, "we'll know who opened the door." That night, as Emma slept soundly under star-shaped lights, Grace stood by the nursery window, watching shadows move across the vineyard. For the first time in her life, she was not just a housekeeper. She was a protector. The greenhouse behind the Langston estate had once been a place of peace. Built for Marissa during her final year, it was her sanctuary, a glass cathedral wrapped in vines and honeysuckle, where time moved slower and the world dared not intrude. After her passing, it became a forgotten space, locked but never abandoned. And now, it was the perfect place for a trap. Ethan and Grace stood beneath its arched iron beams just after sunset, the glass panes glinting with streaks of gold and rose. "I never thought I'd use this place like this," Ethan said, half to himself. Grace knelt beside the antique workbench, sliding a manila folder under a loose floorboard. The document inside was a forgery, meticulously designed, filled with language about Emma's irrevocable inheritance, changes to guardianship, and pending international trusts. "If Daniel's working with someone who wants access to Emma's future," Grace said, "they won't be able to resist this." Ethan looked at her, not with condescension, but with respect. "How did you learn to think like this?" he asked. Grace shrugged. "When you've spent your life watching people ignore you, you learn how to watch everything." By 2:46 a.m., the estate was still. Even the vines seemed to hold their breath. Hidden security cameras, recently repositioned, watched the greenhouse entrance. Grace and Ethan sat side by side in the control room, eyes fixed on the screen. Movement. A figure crept across the lawn, moving low and fast. Dressed in black. Hood pulled tight. He used an old key. The door clicked open. Ethan's hand hovered near the silent alarm. "Wait," Grace whispered. The figure entered, heading straight for the bench, straight for the floorboard. He knew exactly where to look. Daniel Reyes. He lifted the folder, opened it, began photographing each page with his phone. "Now," Grace said. Ethan hit the switch. With a hiss, the custom-installed magnetic locks on the greenhouse doors sealed. Daniel heard it too late. He ran to the exit, slammed into locked glass, turned to the other, locked. His breath fogged the pain. "You think this will hold me?" he screamed, fists pounding. By dawn, police had him in cuffs. "I didn't do this alone," Daniel roared as they led him toward the cruiser. "You think she belongs here? You think she's her mother? She's just the help!" He turned his face toward Grace, who stood with her arms crossed, eyes steady. "You'll never be family." But Grace didn't flinch. Instead, it was Emma, watching from the window, who placed her hand gently on the glass, as if to protect Grace from the hate. Later that morning, Ethan stood in front of the Board of Trustees at Langston Holdings headquarters in San Francisco. He played the surveillance tape, showed the forged documents used to bait the trap, and most importantly, he shared Daniel's confession. There was a name, Russell Whitaker, a longtime board member, smooth, calculated, with a vested interest in controlling the Langston estate through Emma's inheritance, until Marissa's death altered the terms. "Russell backed Daniel's return," Ethan told the board. "He's been trying to install legal guardianship clauses behind my back." "And the maid?" someone sneered. Ethan's voice turned cold. "Is the only reason my daughter is alive, and the only one I trust." Back at the estate, Grace sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching Emma build towers out of wooden blocks. The child kept glancing over, waiting for approval. "Do you like it, Grace?" she called out. "It's perfect." "Baby girl." Emma beamed. A knock at the door. It was Ethan holding a set of documents. "I need to talk to you," he said. Grace stood. "Everything okay?" He hesitated. "Marissa had it in her will. If anything ever happened to me, she wanted you to be Emma's co-guardian. Grace froze. I didn't see it until last night, he said. I had the lawyer resend everything. It's all here. He offered the papers. I want you to consider it. I trust you more than anyone. And Emma, she already sees you that way. Grace's hands stayed at her sides. Ethan, I can't. His brow furrowed. Why not? Because the world won't see me as her guardian, Grace said, voice low. They'll see a maid who climbed too high. They'll question my love for her, twist my motives, and worse, they'll use it to hurt you. Ethan's mouth opened, but she gently placed a hand over his. I'd give my life for her, but I won't give them something to aim at. He looked into her eyes, searching for something to change her mind, but all he found was truth. That night, after Emma fell asleep curled against Grace's side, Ethan sat alone by the fireplace, watching flames dance. He had power, money, security, but it meant nothing if he couldn't protect what truly mattered. Not just Emma, but Grace, too. The quiet force who had become the soul of his home. And perhaps, if he was honest, the anchor of his own heart. The air was crisp with tension. Reporters gathered in clusters near the Langston estate's western garden, microphones poised, cameras humming like restless bees. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect a press conference, among roses and stone benches, but Ethan had insisted. If truth is going to be spoken, he told his publicist, let it be spoken where her name still lives. He meant Marissa, but today all eyes were on Grace, and not everyone wanted her to speak. 2 days earlier, the San Francisco Times had run a front-page story. Langston heiress in danger, internal scandal, rocked by domestic staff intrusion. The subheading hit harder. Sources claim housemaid Grace Williams created rift inside Langston household. It was Russell Whitaker's final act of vengeance. Though now suspended and under federal investigation, he'd leaked falsified testimonies from former disgruntled staff, painting Grace as manipulative, ambitious, and dangerously close to power. It's character assassination, Ethan growled, slamming the newspaper down in his study. He's trying to bury you under public scrutiny. Grace's face had remained calm, but her eyes said everything. Not fear, not anger. Resolve. Now, as reporters shifted under the California sun, whispering among themselves, Grace stood at the edge of the roses with a hand resting lightly on the bench Marissa once sat on. She wore no suit, no power heels, just a simple white blouse and dark slacks. Clean. Honest. Real. Ethan stood beside her, but a few steps behind. Close enough to support, far enough not to shield. This moment belonged to Grace. The publicist leaned in. Are you sure you're ready? Grace nodded. I was ready the day I jumped in that pool. She stepped to the podium. The crowd quieted. No paper in hand, no teleprompter, only truth. My name is Grace Williams, she began. You don't know me, and that's okay. I never intended for you to. Cameras clicked. I came to this estate 3 years ago to clean floors, make breakfast, fold laundry. I was just someone trying to earn enough to take care of my mother in South Carolina. Alzheimer's doesn't wait for anyone. A few pens paused mid-scratch. I didn't come here to change a child's life or a man's legacy. I came here to survive. A pause. But when I saw a little girl sinking in that water, I didn't think. I didn't ask what it would look like. I jumped. More silence. Because that's what love does, even when it's not rewarded, even when it's not safe, even when people think you don't belong. She looked out into the crowd, her voice steady. You can print lies about me. You can label me. But the truth is, I'm still here. Not because I'm perfect, but because a 6-year-old girl looked at me with love when no one else did. And that love, it matters more than your headlines. She stepped back, and the garden broke into applause, slow, then building. Even the reporters couldn't deny it. That evening, news stations aired the full video of Grace's speech. It spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtag the woman who jumped began trending on X. She saved Emma ran across the morning news ticker on CNN. Time magazine requested an interview. Ethan watched it all unfold from his study. Phone buzzing, investors calling, board members apologizing. But he didn't care about any of that. He cared that when he came into the kitchen at 6:30 p.m., he saw Emma standing on a stool, holding a Sharpie, carefully writing on a poster board. He peeked over her shoulder. In crooked little letters, "Grace is my family." Later that night, Ethan and Grace sat on the back porch, wine glasses untouched. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Grace looked up at the stars. "Yes, I did." "It shouldn't be your job to convince people you belong." "I wasn't convincing them," she replied. "I was reminding myself." He turned to her. "Then let me remind you of something, too." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't work for this house anymore." She blinked. "What?" He pulled out a small envelope. Inside, an offer letter. Special advisor to the Langston Foundation. Family Development and Community Safety Programs. A salaried position. Full benefits. Authority. Dignity. "It's a made-up role," he admitted, "but one that matters." Grace smiled, faint but real. "And you?" she asked. "What's your new role?" He chuckled softly. "Full-time student of Grace Williams." They both laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like borrowed peace. It felt like a beginning. The door creaked. For 3 years it had stayed closed, more out of reverence than pain. Marissa's room, untouched since her passing, still carried the faint scent of rose oil and lavender, sealed beneath time and silence. But today, Ethan opened it, not as a husband mourning a memory, but as a father chasing clarity. The news had quieted. Grace's speech had reframed the public narrative. The board, now stripped of Russell's influence, issued a formal apology. Donations poured into the newly formed Langston Foundation for Quiet Heroes, a name Grace hadn't chosen but smiled at when Ethan suggested it. But Ethan couldn't rest. Something inside him still felt unfinished. Why had Marissa trusted Grace so deeply? Why had she been so certain, more than him, that this young woman from South Carolina was not just a helper, but a compass? He stepped into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. The room remained just as she had left it. Cream-colored curtains fluttered softly in the breeze from the barely opened window. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand. A copy of Little Women was still marked at chapter 12. Ethan stood for a long moment, hand on the bedpost. Then he moved. He opened her vanity drawer, scanning through old letters, dried rose petals, lipsticks worn to the nub. Then he saw it, tucked beneath a velvet pouch of perfume samples, an envelope, handwritten, familiar. If he's ready. No name, no date. Ethan opened it, breath uneven. My Ethan. If you're reading this, I trust you finally looked inside the drawer I told you never to touch. Yes, I know you thought it was my stubbornness, but sometimes we wives play the long game. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it from me. Not the version of me that's sick or dying or whispering between hospital sheets, but the version that watched you hold Emma in the hospital room and promised her a world better than we ever had. You are a good man, Ethan. But sometimes good men go silent, and silence can feel like safety when we're hurting. You've always feared being wrong more than being alone. But Grace? Grace doesn't fear being wrong. She fears being invisible. That's why I saw her. That's why I trusted her. That's why, if anything ever clouded your judgment, I begged the lawyers to include her as co-guardian. Not because she's perfect, but because she loves with her whole being, even when no one is watching. That's the kind of love our daughter deserves. So if you're wondering who to trust, if your world is unmoored, let Grace anchor you. Let her love Emma. Let her love you, if you're brave enough. Still yours, Marissa. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in his hand. All the pieces, the fears, the resistance, the jealousy he hadn't admitted, clicked into place. He hadn't just distrusted Grace. He'd distrusted his wife's final judgment. And now, he'd seen it. In every quiet act, every sleepless night Grace spent watching over Emma. Every time she stepped into the line of fire and refused to shrink. He pressed the letter to his chest, eyes closed. "Thank you," he whispered to the room. "I see her now." That evening, he found Grace sitting beneath the oak tree by the vineyard, a soft breeze tugging at the curls near her temple. Emma was beside her, asleep in her lap, clutching a crayon drawing of their family. Ethan walked over quietly, carrying a folder. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down beside them. "Marissa left me something," he said after a while. "Another letter." Grace looked at him, uncertain. "She wrote about you, about how you don't fear being wrong, how you fear being invisible." Grace swallowed. "She saw that?" "She saw everything." He opened the folder. "This is the updated guardianship petition. I won't pressure you to sign it, but I want you to read it. Not as a formality." Grace looked down at the folder. Her hands didn't move. "I still worry what the world will say," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "So do I. But I'm starting to care a lot less about what the world sees, and a lot more about what Emma sees. She already calls me Grace." He smiled. "Maybe one day she'll call you something more. But that's not mine to ask." A long pause. Then Grace leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "Can we just sit here a while?" she asked. Ethan didn't move. "As long as you want." That night, while Emma slept, Grace opened the folder. She didn't sign, not yet. But she left a rose petal inside the page and closed it gently. The smell came before the smoke. Grace was in the kitchen rinsing blueberries for Emma's pancakes when she caught it, an acrid chemical scent cutting through the lavender oil she kept near the sink. Her instincts sharpened in an instant. She stepped out onto the back porch and scanned the horizon. Then she saw it. A curl of gray smoke rising from beyond the vineyard, just past the northern fence. She dropped the bowl. "Emma's inside with Alyssa," she told Ethan, already striding across the back lawn. "I'll call the fire department," Ethan replied, grabbing his coat and following behind her. They ran past rows of grapevines that shimmered silver in the morning dew. When they reached the clearing near the fence line, the flames were already licking the dry brush, low but aggressive, clearly set, not accidental. A gas canister lay nearby, half melted, the label peeling. Nearby, a torn piece of cloth, black, like a uniform sleeve, clung to the fence post, singed at the edge. Grace grabbed the emergency extinguisher mounted at the edge of the barn. Ethan took the garden hose. Within minutes, the fire was out, but the message had been sent. This wasn't random. It was a threat. Sheriff Walker arrived 20 minutes later. Deliberate, she confirmed, crouching near the origin point. Someone poured accelerant along a 20-foot line. If you hadn't caught it early, it would have jumped to the vines. Grace exhaled. We've tightened security. How did they get this close? Walker stood, brushing dust from her knees. Your vineyard's perimeter isn't just vines and charm. It's 400 acres of open opportunity. Whoever did this knew how to avoid motion sensors. Ethan glanced toward the tree line. They're escalating. Walker nodded grimly. Any new enemies lately? Grace and Ethan exchanged a glance. Later that afternoon, Grace walked the garden with Maya, a part-time estate assistant who had been helping Grace manage new safety protocols. Grace stopped near the rose trellis. What is that? She whispered. Tucked behind the stone pillar was a tiny black device, cylindrical, barely the size of a lipstick. Maya leaned closer. Is that a mic? Grace reached out with gloved fingers and lifted it free. A blinking red light confirmed it. It's been listening, she said quietly, all this time. They scoured the estate. 3 more bugs. One in the library, one in the conservatory, one in the garden bench where Grace had given her speech, each one expertly hidden, discreet. I knew the story leaked too perfectly, Ethan muttered, examining the device under his office magnifier. They didn't just hear facts, they heard our conversations. Grace clenched her fists. They're still inside, watching. That evening, as dusk fell over the vineyard, Ethan and Grace sat across from each other in the study, a single lamp casting amber light between them. We need to bait them, Grace said. Ethan raised a brow. Another trap? She nodded. But this time not with documents, with words. He leaned in. She continued, Tomorrow, you and I will argue in the garden. You'll mention a transfer of funds to a private account for Emma's education. I'll object, loudly. We'll make it sound like a breach of trust. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we wait. Then we watch who leaks it. The next morning, Emma sat drawing daisies while Ethan and Grace staged their scene in the garden. I told you I wouldn't let you move the funds, Grace said sharply, voice raised. Ethan snapped back. And I told you it's not up to you. I'm her father. You're betraying Marissa's wishes. She's my daughter. Silence fell. Even Emma looked up, confused. Then Ethan softened. You okay? Grace nodded. Just hate pretending. He smiled gently. You're convincing. She smirked. So are you. That night, as planned, they reviewed the surveillance feed. Nothing. No movements, no leaks. Until 3:17 a.m. An email, traced to a private domain in New York, was sent from a tablet device on the estate's Wi-Fi, masked with VPN, but not enough. The content? A full summary of the fake argument. The sender? Alyssa Grant. The next day, Grace confronted her quietly. They met in the greenhouse, where the first trap had sprung. Alyssa stood nervously, arms crossed. You lied to me, Grace said plainly. I don't know what you're talking about. You listened to our conversations. You sent them to someone. Why? Alyssa looked away, then whispered, I needed the money. From who? Grace pressed. Tears welled in Alyssa's eyes. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. Russell offered me $50,000 to install a few mics. He said you were manipulating the family, said I'd be protecting the girl. Grace's eyes narrowed. Do you believe that now? Alyssa shook her head, ashamed. No. Then tell the police everything, Grace said. Or I will. Alyssa nodded. That night, with the final listening device removed, Ethan and Grace sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies under the oak tree. She's going to be okay, Grace said softly. Ethan looked at her. So are you. Grace didn't reply right away. Instead, she pulled something from her pocket, a silver pendant. Inside, a photo of her mother. Worn. Faded. She always told me, your silence is a gift, but your voice is your power. Ethan looked at her with quiet reverence. You're not just the heart of this house, Grace. You're the shield. Grace smiled. And in the quiet hum of summer's end, no fire burned, only light. The boardroom smelled like polished glass and old power. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco skyline, but no one looked outside. All eyes were fixed on Ethan Langston as he entered, back straight, gaze calm, but fire in every step. Beside him, in a crisp navy dress and flats, stood Grace Williams, not as a guest, as a witness, and maybe, finally, as an equal. This was not just another quarterly meeting, it was the reckoning. Ethan placed a single thick folder on the mahogany table and pushed it toward the center. Inside, he began, are the findings from the internal investigation, the private security report, and the full audio confession of Alyssa Grant, the House staff member Russell Whitaker planted inside my home. Whispers erupted. He didn't flinch. She was paid to install surveillance devices. Those devices captured not only private family moments, but confidential conversations regarding Langston Holdings' succession planning. One board member cleared his throat. Succession planning? Ethan looked directly at him. Yes, specifically concerning my daughter, Emma Langston, the future heir to this company. He paused. Let the tension simmer. Whitaker attempted to manipulate internal opinion by undermining my guardianship and credibility. He intended to push a vote declaring me mentally unfit due to unresolved grief, thereby seizing control of my voting shares through a proxy trust. Gasps. Grace, standing quietly beside Ethan, held her hands folded, but her presence was unmissable. He would have succeeded, Ethan continued, if not for the courage of one person who was never invited into this room. He stepped aside. All of you know her name now, but you never bothered to ask it before. Grace stepped forward. My name is Grace Williams, she said softly. I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't educated in Ivy Halls. But I know how to protect a child, how to fight for what's right, and how to stand when it would be easier to disappear. The room fell silent. She placed a copy of the signed affidavit from Alyssa Grant on the table. In this document, Ms. Grant confesses to receiving $50,000 from Russell Whitaker to record audio, gather intel, and deliver edited transcripts designed to frame me as a manipulative presence inside the Langston family. One of the legal officers leaned forward. Do we have Russell's signature? Ethan reached into his case and placed a personal check on the table. Made out to Alyssa Grant. Signed, Russell Whitaker. That afternoon, the board voted unanimously to terminate Russell Whitaker and bar him from holding any future stake or voting right within Langston Holdings. Federal charges were filed. And Grace? She was offered more than an apology. 2 days later, Ethan stood in the newly renovated conference room of the Langston Foundation for Family Resilience. The walls were lined with photos of women in caregiving roles, nurses, nannies, single mothers, alongside the children they helped raise. A new plaque gleamed beside the entrance. Grace Williams, Director of Family Development and Safety Programs. When he unveiled it, the room erupted in applause. But Grace didn't smile out of pride. She smiled because Emma ran straight into her arms and whispered, "You have an office now." Ethan chuckled. "She's been drawing logos for your imaginary company all week." Grace kissed the girl's cheek. "Well, looks like it's real now." That evening, Grace sat quietly on the wraparound porch of the estate, watching the last pink sliver of sun dip below the vines. Ethan joined her with 2 cups of tea. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" he asked. Grace smirked. "You told me to stay out of your sight." He winced. "I was hoping you'd forgotten." "I didn't, but I forgave." He handed her one of the mugs. "You didn't just save Emma, Grace. You saved me. From my own silence. From letting the wrong people define what matters." She looked at him, eyes soft. "And you gave me something too." "What's that?" "A place to plant roots." Just then, a car pulled into the driveway. A tall, elegant woman stepped out, gray coat, dark sunglasses, and a presence that filled the twilight. Emma ran toward her. "Aunt Eleanor?" Marissa's older sister had arrived from Chicago. She knelt, gathering the little girl into her arms before turning toward the porch. Her eyes met Grace's. For a moment, the air held its breath. Then Eleanor crossed the lawn, heels quiet against the stone path. She stopped in front of Grace and embraced her. "I read Marissa's journals," she whispered. "She loved you, trusted you, and now I understand why." Grace blinked back tears. "Thank you." Eleanor pulled back, smiled, and said something only Grace could hear. She chose the right woman. The earth was soft that morning. Grace knelt in the garden, her hands brushing aside the golden leaves of late autumn. The sun was still low, casting long, honey-colored shadows through the trellised vines. The rose bushes, though fading with the season, still held the ghost of summer in their petals. In her lap rested a small wooden box. Inside, a letter from Marissa, folded and reread until the creases became memory. A crayon drawing from Emma, depicting 3 figures hand in hand beneath a crooked sun. And one dried rose, its petals wrinkled but intact, the same one Grace had found tucked in the drawer weeks ago. She had waited for this day, not to bury the past, but to return it to where it belonged. Emma sat on the garden bench nearby, swinging her legs, cradling a thermos of warm cocoa. She wore a sweater 2 sizes too big, Grace's, of course, and her hair was braided into 2 lopsided plaits. "Can I help?" the little girl asked. Grace smiled. "You already are." Emma stood and walked over. Together they dug a small hollow near the base of the central rose bush, the one Marissa had always called her sentinel. Grace placed the box inside, covered it slowly, and whispered, "Thank you." Later that day, the estate came alive, not with tension, not with secrets, but with music and laughter. The inaugural fundraiser for the Langston Foundation for Family Resilience had drawn neighbors, friends, and families from across Napa and San Francisco. There were booths for children, story corners, music performances, and tables where mothers shared stories of healing and hope. At the heart of it all stood Grace, welcoming, guiding, never above, always among. Ethan watched her from the garden path, dressed in a charcoal suit but with his sleeves rolled up, holding Emma's hand. His daughter pulled him toward the lemonade stand, then back to the swing set, then to Grace's side. As they walked, he noticed the way people smiled at Grace, not politely, gratefully, as if they'd always known her, and now were finally allowed to say so. Later, as dusk fell and the final guests departed, Grace stood at the edge of the vineyard, looking toward the horizon. Ethan joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "You've made this place whole again," he said quietly. She didn't respond right away. "It was never about fixing the house. It was about letting it breathe." He handed her a glass. "To breathing," he toasted. They clinked glasses. He hesitated. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Emma's school has a parent-child dance coming up. She's been asking who's going to take her." Grace laughed softly. "I think we both know the answer to that." "Still," Ethan said, more serious now, "I want to make it official." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. No legal stamp, no signatures, just crayon drawings. A title scrawled in Emma's handwriting, "My Family Contract." Grace opened it. Inside were 3 lines. Rule number 1, we eat pancakes on Sundays. Rule number 2, we hug when someone's sad. Rule number 3, Grace is my forever family. At the bottom, a place for signatures. Emma's was already there. So was Ethan's. And in the corner, a red heart. Grace smiled through the tears. "It's the only contract I've ever wanted to sign." She bent down and added her name. That night, the house was quiet again, but not silent. Soft piano music echoed from the living room. Emma danced barefoot on the carpet, twirling in her pajamas while Grace and Ethan watched from the couch. At one point, Emma stopped and looked up at Grace. "Can I call you something?" Grace smiled. "Of course." Emma took a breath, then whispered, "Mommy G." Ethan's hand reached for Grace's. She gripped it. No words were needed. In the garden, the soil where the box was buried remained untouched, but not unseen. And from it, beneath the coming spring, a single rose would bloom. New, strong, loved into being. Thank you for listening to this story. From a dismissed housemaid to being called Mommy G, Grace didn't just save a child, she healed an entire family. If you believe kindness can change the world, subscribe to this channel and let's keep the warmth going for hearts that need it most. See you in the next story.